third
I'd like to tell everyone, that
phase.
Mr. Bassett organized a great event. Dr. Greer was one of them, but we have Dr. Greer on the line. We'd like to tell everyone, all the listeners out there, make sure you're tuning in. Dr. Greer, how are you today?
Oh, I'm doing great. How are you?
Excellent, excellent. You're live here on Third Phase of Moon Radio with me, myself, and Blake Cousins, of course. Let me just jump right into it. I was speaking to a friend recently, and he was telling me that really the secrecy is not really about aliens. They're not really hiding the ETs. It's more so that they're covering the technology, just like you've been saying, the $600 trillion petrodollar secrecy. And I think that makes more sense of why instead of they would be covering up civilizations, rather their technology. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I think so. And if you look at the when I first started the Disclosure Project and before that Project Starlight, when I was briefing the Clinton administration and his first CIA director, only about a third of the public thought this was legitimate and true. Now it's over half to two-thirds believe that the UFOs are real, the government is hiding something, and that in fact, about 43% believe that they're currently visiting the Earth in the latest poll that happened, that was taken a couple months ago. So when you look at those statistics, the presence of there being life in the universe is no big shocker. Now, it may have been in the 30s and 40s when they were first dealing with a lot of the events that happened in the period, and particularly the 40s with the atomic weapons testing, when the ETs were very concerned about what the crazy monkeys on Earth were doing, about ready to blow the planet up. But I think that since then, the public, there's no real shock issue around the fact that there's intelligent life in the universe, or even that we maybe have been visited in the past and are being visited today. But the reason it remains what we call an unacknowledged special access project, or USAP, which is the proper name for an ultra-secret black project, is that the technologies that are behind the energy and propulsion systems behind these craft that allow them to move as you see them in the videos and photos that we have, and you go to SeriousDisclosure.com and see many of them, those are not using fossil fuels and rockets. And so what they're using are very high voltage systems that create a vector into the so-called zero point of quantum vacuum space. And if it's done in a certain way, it causes mass cancellation and anti-gravity or gravity control and energy generation. And this was studied all the way back to the turn of the century in the 1800s in terms of just energy generation. And by 1929, T. Townsend Brown and others started doing high-voltage experiments that resulted in a mass cancellation and quote-unquote levitation effect. And we've documented this. This information's all up on our website. So then the question becomes, what happened when they began to encounter actual ET civilizations and the craft that they were able to acquire and down at that time? That technology folded into the classified programs that T. Townsend Brown was involved with, and that the Air Force took over in the 40s. And by what I tell people is by October of 1954, and that's the date everyone should know, I have people who've been at the vault at the National Security Agency who've seen this, we figured out gravity control. So from 1954 to now, we have not needed oil, gas, coal, surface roads, jet engines, rockets, public utilities, or any of it, and you add all that up, including the commodities sitting in the ground, and you're talking about hundreds of trillions of dollars. And that is the problem, because as one of Bush's advisors told me, who was a Harvard law guy who was Bush's advisor on nuclear energy, he said, look, no doubt this is all true, but what you're suggesting is too disruptive. I said, well, disruptive to whom? The 0.00001% of people who own oil fields, or to humanity. I mean, right now you have over half of the world living in unbelievable poverty, and 48% of the public has no running water or plumbing in their house, and that's a true statistic from the World Health Organization. Why? Because there's a macroeconomic system that requires the zero-sum game of the energy distribution and wealth distribution system that is based on the petrodollar and oil. And that is really an existential threat to the human future and, of course, to Gaia, to the Earth being destroyed. So I tell people that issue, the macroeconomic, and I know that the Honorable Paul Hellyer, who I brought into this whole process some years ago, and he and I did a press conference up in Toronto. He had been the Minister of Defense of Canada. He and I talked about this, and he's a macroeconomic specialist, actually, and he said, yes, absolutely, this is the big problem with the subject. And it is a science and technology problem on one level. It's an environmental story. It's the story, the oldest story in the world of human greed and fear and the cartels that kind of run the planet and don't want to give up their power. But ultimately, it's about us. It's about humans much more than it is about ETs, although the ETs are real and they're here. But they're patiently, I believe, waiting for us to try to wake up and fix this problem because, I know that most people think that somehow they can just sit back and be entertained with shock and drivel on reality TV and YouTube, and this will fix itself. But you know what? It doesn't. We have to fix it. And so what I started in the 1990s with the Disclosure Project up to now is to try to awaken people to this and now bring it to the next level where we say, okay, we brought out the information. We know the ETs are here. We can prove that it's been kept secret. Now what? Well, the next step is to bring out the science and technology part of it and say goodbye to big oil. And that is the hardest part of this. The information part of it has not been easy to do properly, but the technological angle of it is that's a very heavy lift, as we call it, because you're now talking about taking on the most powerful interests on the planet.
Speaking of ETs, thanks for joining us right here at Third Phase Moon. This is Blake Cousins, but Dr. Stephen Greer, I want to ask you about, crash and retrieval with UFOs. It's been going on for decades now, and ufologists, have been covering it. In your opinion, which of them are true and which of them can, possibly be disinformation?
Well, actually, it's a very mixed bag, and it's not crash and retrieval. It's downed and retrieval. Now, let me explain what I mean. You have things like the so-called Roswell event. Did it happen? Yes. What was it? Well, I have an FBI document, which has now become the most popular document at the FBI website, by the way, that my group was the first to release, that talks about the fact that there were these bodies recovered, but that there was a new, quote-unquote, high-powered radar system there that caused two of these craft to collide. One went down north of Roswell, and one continued and impacted near Socorro. The one near Roswell was in bits and pieces. The one further west was more intact, and that's where they got the living ET out of it. Now, that was actually not a regular radar dome. That was a Tesla-type coil. And remember, the so-called scalar electromagnetic systems began to be experimented with way back at the end of the 1800s and early 1900s. So there had been attempts to interfere with the electronic propulsion systems of these craft since the 40s. And so they don't come from interstellar space and just accidentally crash in the New Mexico desert. That's just nonsense. So number one, it's not a crash in the sense of just an accident. Number two, some of the events that have happened, I believe perhaps the Kecksburg case and most certainly the Cash Landrum case over Houston, outside Houston, where the thing was spewing a nuclear material and there were two helicopters escorting it. Those are malfunctions of what are called ARVs, alien reproduction vehicles, that are made by Lockheed Martin and my uncle's old company, Northrop Grumman. My uncle worked on the lunar module and was the senior project engineer for the lunar module that put the first man on the moon. And back then it was Grumman, but then it became Northrop Grumman. And so I grew up knowing about a lot of this stuff. And so a lot of the accidents that have happened have been mishaps, but it makes a very good cover story to say, oh, it was an ET craft, because they do not want the public to know that our aerospace industry, having stolen, as Rumsfeld said, $2.3 trillion out of our coffers over the last few decades, have this stuff and are hiding it from us, and including hiding it from senior people in our own government, such as the president. So what you end up with is something where they will concoct something, and they will want people to think it's quote-unquote ET, but it isn't. Now, this means that you have all of the above. You have events that are man-made cover story events. You have things that are actually ET craft that have downed. And then you have some things that are sort of a mix between the two, where we've had some of our own advanced propulsion anti-gravity vehicles trying to interface in a hostile way with ET craft, and there have been mishaps. So remember the famous Iranian case where the Iranian F-16 pilots armed their missile systems, and the ETs basically took the missile systems offline. They didn't make the jet crash. I mean, they could have turned it into a vapor if they wanted to, but they didn't. They just disabled that weapon system. So there's been an enormous amount of restraint on the part of the ETs. Unfortunately, there has not been a lot of restraint on the part of the humans. And this is the part that's gotten turned on its head in the UFO, what I call the UFO ghetto of rumor and misunderstanding. I assured everyone that years ago that if these civilizations that have the ability to travel interstellar and transdimensionally wanted to do harm to us, it would have been over the day we detonated the first atomic weapon at the Trinity site at White Sands Missile Facility. The truth is that they're waiting for us to become peaceful, and we haven't made that transition yet. And the Disclosure Project witnesses who were at the various nuclear facilities where ET craft flew over all attested to the fact that not only did we took hostile action, but the ETs were actually not just tampering with our weapons just to be mashugana or troublemakers. They were doing it to give us an indication at the same time they were doing this in the old Soviet Union to say, look, please don't go to mutual assured destruction and destroy this planet. But if you do go to mutually assured destruction, we can transdimensionally, electronically shut those systems down. I think that, these are complex issues that people want to make very, very simple. But the truth of the matter is there have been a number of ET craft that unfortunately have been downed. I've worked with a number of guys who have been on the teams that have been responsible for that. And years ago, I was given a lecture, and a Navy intelligence officer was at the back of the room waiting for me to finish, and he said, "You have no idea how insane what we're doing is." And he started telling me about these electromagnetic weapons and pulse weapons and scalar weapons that are human, that are used to target ET vehicles, and that how dangerous it is and how reckless. I said, yes, I'm very aware of that. And I said, this is something that is, I believe, an existential threat to our national security, which is what I've actually said when I've done face-to-face meetings with the head of the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA director and folks like that. Most people turn this on its head and think,
hello, I think we just, Dr.
Yeah, Dr. Greer, two great things that could be said about that. First, those ARVs prove conclusively that obviously we have the capability, just like you said, since 1954, and also that the fact that they're shutting down those nuclear missiles prove that they actually care about us. Now, I want to switch gears real quick. In your Sirius documentary, which, by the way, for all you listeners out there who have yet to see it, we have the distribution link right on Third Phase of Moon, so make sure you all see it out there. It's a great blockbuster film. You showed tons or thousands of CE5 teams and ambassadors. What you've been doing since the 90s, obviously, and it's been working. You've been having these contact with these, great civilizations. But what can our listeners and viewers do to become involved with CE5?
Yeah, well, a close encounter of the fifth kind is when humans deliberately make contact peacefully with these interstellar civilizations, and in contradistinction to the nonsense that our covert programs have been engaged in. And I tell people that since the State Department doesn't have a project doing this, and John Kerry or Hillary Clinton haven't, and the UN Secretary General isn't dealing with this, it has created a vacuum where the only face being shown to these civilizations is the worst aspect of humanity. And therefore, it is incumbent upon us who are peaceful and enlightened to be citizen ambassadors to these civilizations. And that's a close encounter of the fifth kind, is when humans invite them to make contact within the paradigm of universal peace. And so anyone who wants to do that, there's actually a contact app at the App Store for iPhones, but also Android app, that you can find on our website, SiriusDisclosure.com. It's SIRIUS Disclosure.com. And those apps have the entire remote viewing course, meditation course, all the electronic information you need, the tones that we send out into space. It actually turns your smartphone into a magnetic field meter so that if an object is approaching that is not even visible with the naked eye, but is setting up a magnetic field flux or change, it will pick that up on your phone, even if you're out in the middle of the wilderness. And so that's there for any, it's basically, it's very inexpensive. It's the cost of a deli sandwich or something. And that's out there now for both Android and iPhones. And anyone can do that. What's amazing is that there are thousands of teams now, several thousand teams around the world doing this. And I mean, we got a report recently from a truck driver in Eastern Europe who had gotten this app and was practicing the protocols when he was taking a break. And it's just a regular guy. And this craft materializes and floats right over, and he's having this amazing contact event that takes place. And these reports are coming in from all over the world. And what that says to me is every person can do this, and the ETs are wanting humans to reach out to them in a way that isn't militaristic and crazy. So if you do it, if you build it, they will come. Not always in the way that you might expect, but in ways that are sometimes even more beautiful than if they fully materialize in this dimension. We've had objects that have come in as sort of spheres that are fully materialized that send out these beautiful harmonic tones that surround us that we recorded, and all kinds of unusual things, which you would expect if it's actually an interstellar and not a Lockheed Martin anti-gravity machine. So I think that this is what's really exciting. People can learn this, and it isn't difficult. There's some principles that have to be understood. The primary one being that when you deal with civilizations that go faster than the speed of light, they don't do that by speeding up like you do when you're taking off in a 747 going from here to Australia. You do it by a quantum transdimensional leap from linear 3D space into other dimensions and back. And that means that you're crossing over into a transdimensional understanding of the cosmos. And the finer you go into those dimensions, the closer it approximates mind or consciousness and thought. And this is what really blows people's minds. And I know that for some people, they think, oh, my God, this is too far out. And I'm going, no, it's not quite far out enough. I haven't scratched the surface here. And what people need to understand, and we try to deal with this in the film Sirius, is that there have been studies that have been done for years that show that mind and consciousness and even thought that's directed from mind and consciousness can affect physical systems, such as random number generators at a remote distance. And that these studies have been done by multiple scientists at various places, including Dr. Bob John at Princeton, at the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. And I knew Dr. John when he was alive. And he said, yeah, this has absolutely been proven that the mind itself is an omnipresent field that is everywhere. And that's everyone's mind, not just, some guru's mind. So that means that if you can learn to center and go into a deep meditative state, you can then learn to remote view distant places and then use these contact protocols to, as it were, vector ET craft into wherever you are. And what we have found is that people begin to practice that. It really does happen. And it happens in ways that often they're not expecting, because everyone is so materialistic on this planet. They expect it to be, you're going to go and kick the tires like you would on a 747. And sometimes they do fully materialize like that. Usually it's in another energy form, but it's very palpable and quite beautiful. And so I think people have to understand, begin to educate themselves about the nature of the cosmos and a new understanding of the cosmos that goes beyond space and time and begins to look at and there's a very fundamental question. If they are here, and they are, how they get here? Well, they're not staying in a solid 3D form when they're going from one star system or galaxy to here. They're dropping out of linear space-time wherever their planet is, and appearing where we are here near Earth, going through these other dimensions. And that is where the real breakthroughs are in understanding. And I find that the most exciting part of this, although it almost never gets talked about in UFO circles, because people stay with this sort of a very teleologic, a very linear understanding. They just see an object and it's there, and oh, isn't that cool? Yeah, but how to get here? and what are the physics of that? And this is why many people who've had these close encounters will tell you that there's a complete and direct link up between their thought and consciousness and not just the occupants of the craft, but the craft itself, which is conscious and intelligent at the level of artificial intelligence to the point that the craft itself is sentient, like a creature. Now, I know we're getting off into some really wild stuff here, but that is true. And so people who've had these sort of very close encounters, I know a number of scientists who have, they'll say, boy, that's absolutely true. I didn't understand what it was. And you begin to come into this new understanding of the cosmos, that the entire cosmos is a conscious quantum hologram, and everything is conscious, including the studies they did with photons, where they found that a photon could be fired and someone thinking about it would alter its course. Well, how does that happen? And this was actually in the physics journal some years ago, back in the 90s. So I think, we have to begin to look at everything with a new eye and realize that this is really a wonderful time for exploration.
With the speed of the internet and millions of people around the world becoming connected within, the same experience, UFO encounters, alien abductions, the power to possibly even summon them at will. We've been covering a man in Los Angeles that claims he does. People show up, balls and orbs are being captured on film and on photographs. And we want to get more of Dr. Greer's insight and what he's going to be doing with his Heroes Project and the movement itself. We're going to be going to break, but we're also going to be asking him what he thinks about J-Rod and Area 51. We want to ask him about what he thinks about the ET agenda, if there is an agenda, and, what the visitors are doing here. Do they have a purpose here on Earth? Dr. Greer has been doing research for many, many years now. Millions of people have seen the movie. The DVDs are up for sale now. Everybody could go to Third Phase of Moon and click the link and order that DVD, which is available right now. It's been incredible. And Mr. Greer, can you stick around right here on Third Phase of Moon so we could get in some more questions? We're going to be going to break here in a few seconds.
Sure. Absolutely.
Right. Oh, this is amazing. Dr. J. Andy Elias, what do you think is going on so far in this interview? And, this is going to be some more great information coming in if they just stay tuned right after this break.
Absolutely, break, and we're just coming on to the break. For all you viewers out there and listeners, be sure you stay tuned. We're Third Phase of Moon Radio. We'll be right back just after this quick message. That's right, everybody. We are back to Third Phase of Moon Radio. I'm your host, Dr. J. Andy Elias, my co-host, of course, Blake Cousins, working real hard out there to get all the information via Third Phase of Moon to all the people. And we have Dr. Stephen Greer on the line. Just before we went on break, Blake Cousins had a great question for Dr. Greer. Blake, go ahead and take it.
Well, we want to get to a couple of important questions, but I wanted to get your thoughts. We get videos from around the world on a daily basis. I think a lot of these videos, these unidentified flying objects are, CIA drones, new type of military aircraft, experimental aircraft that's not being released to the public. And what are your thoughts on Wernher von Braun's statement to his manager that the last false flag that the government will play is, a possible alien attack? They're going to make us believe that we're under attack by aliens for better control and have more control of the people. What do you think the agenda is?
Well, I think that's the dominant paradigm that's out there. In fact, I think that there's an enormous amount of material that is masquerading as ET that is not. And what I say is that there's actual ET contact events, and then there are alien events. The alien events are man-made, because I consider the word alien to be very much a xenophobic word, much like the N word or the F word or what have you. And what you find is that the covert programs that decided that there was no way to hide this except in plain sight decided, and I have a CIA document from 1953 describing this, that it's a matter of great psychological warfare value, I'm quoting. What that means is that by putting materials out there that would make people think that there is some kind of a threat, that they could do two things. One is maintain the hegemony and control that fear always engenders, whether it's 9/11 or fear of a different race or homophobia or misogyny or whatever it is. I mean, that's how big institutions have controlled their populations for thousands of years, is through fear. The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned us about, and the macroeconomic system that goes with it, has organized our society around division, warfare, and conflict. Now, if we change that dynamic, it means that those who have all this centralized power, no matter how covert it may be, will have to, sort of adapt and change and relatively lose that power. So it is in their best interest, and this is cynical to say it this way, to present the subject in a way that is scary to people. And I think that's why in the last couple of years there have been about $2 billion spent in Hollywood on very negative, frightening movies, and why the so-called mutilation and abduction phenomenon gets front page center. When I have interviewed multiple people who have been on the abduction squads and the mutilation squads that are doing a better human. And this is not known very well in the UFO subculture, that there has been a very well-organized covert program the Strategic Studies Institute back in the 90s have a document with them talking about the well-crafted event in using, I'm quoting now, stagecraft to simulate ET encounters using abductions, mutilations, and things of this sort. This is all in there. And it even talks about using radionic and electronic systems that would cause an alteration in consciousness and thought, using man-made things that look like UFOs, this gets into the whole discussion of something called programmed life forms, things that look like aliens, but they're actually not. They're robotic creatures that have integrated circuits in their neural cortex. And most people don't know this, and I'm always astonished that the UFO subculture doesn't know this, because Martin Cannon back in the late 1980s, began to expose this. And most of the people I know in the deep circles on this subject understand that so many of the reports and encounters that people have, which are real, that are terrifying, aren't ET at all, but they're man-made masquerading. I remember interviewing a man who was on an abduction squad based out of a covert facility in Colorado, and he had been an Army Ranger and then was pulled into this other program. And he explained to me how many military people and even families within political circles they had abducted, making it look like it was an ET encounter that was frightening, so that those folks could go along with an agenda to weaponize space and to create this specter of a threat. So I believe, and this is where a lot of people really don't like what I'm about to say, about 90% of the material that's out there has been carefully staged disinformation that is psychologically positioned to have people believe that there is a threat from outer space that we need to unite around to fight, like Ronald Reagan said at the United Nations. It's actually in our film. And I think that this is something that people don't understand how easy it is to do. They think that what I've just said is like, oh, we couldn't do that. I'm going, really? You really think that with trillions spent in covert technologies that we couldn't create these sort of staged events, and have been? So it's not like there's some big event that's coming, although it may come, that's a false flag. They've been staging stuff since the 50s to scare the hell out of people. And this is what most people in the UFO subculture don't understand, and unfortunately they've taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. And I think this is really something that I know is very controversial that I talk about. People don't like to hear it. But it's unfortunately something I learned about in the early to mid-'90s. In fact, I remember meeting with one of the royal family members in Europe who told me about how he was funding some of the abduction groups and researchers so that they would gather together these cases that had been staged, so that people would, quote, hate the aliens and support the final battle in space that could lead to this end of the world scenario so that Christ would return. Now, this was a guy who was the chief funder of this group Opus Dei at the Vatican, and I'm sitting with this guy. My daughter, one of my daughters, is in the room playing as a child off in a corner, and I almost fall out of my chair as I'm hearing this crazy, I mean, this is, excuse my French, batshit crazy stuff. And I'm going, really? And this is one of the head of one of the royal families in Europe. And I'm going, okay. So I'm beginning to connect the dots. And then he told me how when Dr. John Mack became less negative about the ETs, he stopped funding him because he only wanted the information to come out that would be scary and negative and frightening so that people would accept that there is an enemy that at some point we could be manipulated into fighting. So this is the kind of stuff. So I'm actually rather skeptical about a lot of the material that passes as ET when I think it's actually not. And the contacts that people have had that's actually ET end up you never hear about because they won't get the press coverage or the subculture coverage or the conference coverage or the Hollywood coverage that you would normally have. And I think this is a real tragedy. And I think that there, in a sense, there's been a cover-up inside the UFO subculture of this information that's going on even to the present moment.
You know, Dr. Greer, you're at the AT, the possibly little being that you found. They said that it's 90% human DNA and 10% unknown, which is going to take quite some time for them to actually decode and sequence the whole thing. Now, there's been theories going around that all the planets have been seeded with humanoid creatures, 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, 2 arms, 2 legs that walk on 2 feet. Wouldn't it be really obvious to all the people, especially the skeptics, that such humanoids would have to have 90% DNA, especially if we have some extraterrestrial DNA amongst us? Therefore, that 10% gap of unknown, whereas a chimp is 98% human, and this humanoid that you have was only 90%. I mean, doesn't that explain that huge difference right there, that this is possibly the smoking gun?
Well, we don't know yet because the 9% that's unmatched, we don't know if it's computer error. We don't know if it's actual operative genes. We don't know what it is, but it didn't match. And it's a very high number. It's more than you would expect if you were doing a run on something that was human. So the question becomes very quickly, the other issue is the world's expert on these matters of abnormal skeletal forms at Stanford, Dr. Ralph Lockman, said, look, this is a 6 to 8 year old child, but it's only 6 inches tall. And now we're finding that apparently there's another one of these in Santiago in the hands of another person, and there may have been one retrieved in 1996 or so in Russia, and there may be one in Puerto Rico. So I'm beginning to get reports from around the world. So if there's more than one of them, there's no way it's a one-off mutation. And then the question becomes, what is it? Now, no one can say for sure yet what it is, but what's been reported in the media where they have confused this issue with this computerized run on the genetics. I mean, I clipped the anterior right ribs and got really high-quality bone marrow from this little creature, this 6-inch Atacama humanoid that you want to see my report. It's on our website at SeriousDisclosure.com, and as well as the CAT scans and the X-rays. Everything's up there. So what I tell people is that this genetic material was very high quality, and it wasn't like it had to go through a lot of PCR, polymerase chain reaction replication. So there wasn't a whole lot of error that took place. So if you have 9-10% that isn't matching, it's unmatched. What is it? Now, to answer that question may take years because ultimately you're going to have to go through 2 million base pairs, which could be as many as 2,000 or 3,000 genes, and figure out if it's operative or not. And the only way to really know that is to take it and put it in like a mouse study. But would that even be relevant if it's not human or originating from this earth? So there's a whole lot of questions, and I don't think the answer is going to be genetic. I think the answer is going to be more clinical. And what I mean by that is that if you have a 6 to 8 year old that's only 6 inches high, it precludes, if it lived 100 or 1,000 years ago, that it could have been kept alive if it was a truly deformed human child. How did it live? And if there are reports of more of these, how did that happen? And now I'm getting a report that in this remote area of Chile, there was an area where there was a lot of mining, where an underground mine cut into like an underground miniature city where these life forms lived. And if that's true, then that is astonishing. And this is why there's so much more research that has to be done before you can come out on one side of this or the other. But yes, I would agree that if you look at the fact that there may be this concept of almost panspermia, where life has been seeded amongst many star systems throughout the cosmos, and maybe our Native American elders were correct. My grandmother was Cherokee, and their tradition was that they came from the Pleiades, and that maybe they were correct when they said that our ancestors came from the stars. Maybe it's not just a mythology. Maybe there's real profound understanding there. And we have to keep a really open mind about that. And the evidence is, if you look at the things that have been done on ancient sites all over the earth, is that there appears to have been a consistent level of contact in ancient times up to the present hour of ETs with humans. And the question is, where are we going from here? I mean, instead of looking backward for a moment, let's look forward. Well, if we can become a peaceful civilization instead of a dysfunctional one, I think that there are literally thousands of civilizations out there waiting for us to grow up, and they will welcome us with open arms if we go out into space peacefully. If we go out there in a militarized way, we're not welcome. You know, Neil Armstrong was overheard saying after we landed on the moon, and we did go there, by the way, although the footage wasn't correct. A lot of it was staged. That we were not welcome there, and that we were warned off. And people go, what did he mean? Well, what he meant was the Apollo program and of all of our space programs have really been proxies for the military and have been highly militarized. And we were competing at that time in 1969 with the Soviet Union in the space race, as they called it. So the ETs are wanting us to look at all of this differently. It takes a different level of consciousness. And that's why I think people have to be very careful before they jump to these sort of fearsome conclusions about, oh, they're the good ETs and the bad ETs, and there's some big war in space like some sort of Star Wars fantasy movie. The reality is very unlikely that you're going to be able to go through one star system to another, have that level of technological power, and not have achieved some degree of real civilization. And by real civilization, enlightenment, I mean you've become fundamentally peaceful. Because if you haven't, you will have blown yourself up and your own people up before you get this far. Look at where we are. I mean, if we were to stay on the path we're on now, we're not only going to destroy our biosphere, but we're going to start blowing each other up with more and more fierce systems. So I think this is a really key issue, is that we have to figure out where we are, where we're going. But perhaps part of that understanding is where we've come from and where have we come from. I mean, it's really a fascinating question, and I think this Atacama humanoid that's featured in the film series is something that may hold some of the answers.
You know, absolutely amazing, Dr. Greer, and we want to get some more questions in. I know you're going to have to get going at 8:56 your time. Do you think you could maybe stay on just a little bit longer? We have a few more good questions we want to get into you.
Oh, I wish I could, but I've actually got an appointment at 9 o'clock hour Eastern time, so that's about as far as I can go on this round. We can do it again, though.
Certainly, that'd be amazing to have you back. Let's get to this before you have to get going. You know, there's a lot of descriptions of these alien graves, and the heads are much larger than ours. My theory is that they may be possibly humans from the future visiting us with their, time travel capabilities, and that, their brains, they're able to maximize their brain. We're only using 10 to 15% of the capacity, the power of the brain. What do you think it would take to get it to that 100%? And do you think it would be possible to maybe even telepathically speak to beings in other parts of the galaxy telepathically?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things we do with the CE5 initiative is to train people in remote viewing and higher states of consciousness. And there's an iPhone and an Android app where anyone can learn these protocols that you can find on our website, through our website. And I think that the truth is that we have the capacity, it's unlocked at this point, and that meditative processes and the development of the mind actually, they're now finding, does unlock specific genes and actually affects the telomeres and what have you. I was just reading an article, a science article, last night as I was going to sleep about this. And so I know I'm a terrible nerd, but deal with it. So the truth is that we have that ability, and it is within us, and there are techniques that we can do to develop it. And as time goes forward, what I see humans developing is increasingly this capability to see into other points of space and time, to remote view, to be able to make contact and understand the power of consciousness, because it's an omnipresent field. And many people don't know this, but before I was a medical doctor, I was a meditation teacher, and I used to also tutor people in Sanskrit. And what I found is that almost everyone has this ability. In fact, everyone has this ability if they take the time to understand the principles of consciousness and meditative techniques that work. Most people are so scattered they never take the time to be quiet and do nothing, as the Zen saying says. But I think we can develop that ability, and when we do, we actually then reform our neural complex. You know, we have 100 billion neurons in our brain. It's the same number of stars as there are in the Milky Way galaxy. And it's been proven that as you develop consciousness in these meditation techniques, those neural axonal connections develop. And so we have a great deal that we can do. And I think primacy rests with consciousness, the mind, not the other way around, that the body is actually a reflection of the mind and that you can manifest that. And I think we have a very linear and materialistic understanding of reality that's going to get turned on its head pretty soon, because we really live in a quantum conscious hologram where every point in space and time and all of infinity is connected to every other through this organizing principle of awareness and consciousness. And I know every civilization that travels interstellar knows this. They cannot go beyond the speed of light without grasping this. And I think this is the really exciting information that needs to begin to come out, along with the technologies of free energy and anti-gravity. Ironically, a lot of people think that what I'm advocating to do is to create, the film Sirius is a tool to raise awareness, but also is to raise funds for an energy research effort so that we bring out these technologies independent of large corporations and the government, and to do it in an open source way, instead of a secretive way that most inventors do, which never works on this issue. And I think we want to be able to do that, and it sounds very futuristic, and it can be done. But I think the next big thing is actually understanding the science of consciousness and non-locality of mind and all of these issues that begin to be touched on in the film Sirius. But it's so exciting because that is the secret to contact, to making contact consciously. And humans can do this if they take the time to understand it. And that's a part of what I've been trying to train people to do over the last 20 years.
You know, Dr. Greer, you mentioned earlier that there's a large percentage of these third world countries that do not have, this plumbing or electricity at all. Briefly, we only got a few minutes left, but I just want to know, what can we do to get these free energy machines, such as John Searle's device and others, and into these third world countries, and what can we do to wake up the world to stop thinking in such a linear fashion and to start expanding their mind?
Well, first we have to educate ourselves about what's happening, and that's really why we did the film Sirius, and it's almost a 2-hour film. On our website at SiriusDisclosure.com, we have a button at the top called Evidence, where you can learn a great deal more, and it connects to all these different sites dealing with energy, contact, what have you. And I think, importantly, people can contribute to that. When they view the film online or get the DVD or make a donation, there's a donation button on our site. It goes into a fund so that we can develop this lab and bring these technologies out, because it's not just the developing world that needs them. We need them. I mean, we're the greatest polluters on Earth here in the West, and now China that's industrialized. And I think these technologies, which should have started coming out in the early 1900s to late 1800s, actually, have got to come out now. And I think people have to say, well, if the government won't do it or can't, and the corporations are so corrupt they won't do it, why don't we do it? And that's what we're trying to develop the resources to achieve, and everyone can contribute in some small measure to that. The other thing we're going to do in next month, after the DVD begins to ship out to folks, is to organize Star Energy Research Lab fundraiser parties around screening the film Sirius, so people can host a screening of the film Sirius at their home or their church or their community center or wherever, and do a fundraiser for us. And I think if, we have over 4,000 affiliates for distributing Sirius right now over the internet. If everyone did that and held a screening, we could probably raise the funds to do this research and get these technologies out very quickly. So that's what we want to do. I do not think it's going to happen by some guy sitting in his basement doing this by himself. It isn't going to happen by the government, and it isn't going to happen in a large corporation. I think what we're suggesting can make it happen, and it's about all of us coming together and deciding it's time.
It is time, and we are affiliates right here at Third Phase of Moon, and we've helped in the distribution process, and the word is getting out. We really want to thank Dr. Stephen Greer for being here on Third Phase of Moon. On behalf of Dr. J. Andy Elias and Blake Cousins, we really want to thank you, and we look forward to having you back to discuss more of your knowledge, and we definitely have a lot more questions for you, Stephen Greer.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, thank you so much for your help and support, and I appreciate it, and it was great meeting you guys, and hope to do this again soon.
Thank you, Dr. Greer. Real quick, we got one quick minute. You want to tell the viewers one final statement in briefly in less than a minute?
Well, what I would say is that the future that awaits us is unimaginably beautiful if we manifest it, and it's actually in our hands. It's not in the hands of the White House or the people that you think it is. It's actually in our hands, everyone. And if we come together, we can create a future of our dreams, because ultimately the world we have is the world we create. And that's what I would encourage people to come together and do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Greer. Everyone stay tuned for Third Phase of Moon Radio. Hour 2 is coming right back right after these short messages.